Man will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing his true self. When I first read these words from Carl, it was on an internet meme, but finding the content surrounding these bars led me to find the breadth and fruit-seeding depth of this quote is so much more than can be slung out as a one-liner. We will address that, but first let's light up this intro shit. Your own pain, anger, and misvirtue are the effects of having a body, biological limitation in this form of reality. We have symbolically called this the cube. This shadow is cast by having a body that fractals out from the light, that being your true higher self. This shadow being dark, of course, is why we call that cube black. In other words, this shadow is an asset to you as long as you have the body to cast it and the balls to embrace it. One may try to become monk-like by avoiding these negative aspects altogether, but this is a dangerous mistake. Wise men, like monks and sages, all the way down to the honest everyday man of kindness and honor, have learned to integrate their shadow and therefore love this part of themselves as the natural format that it is, the animal nature attached to the foot of divinity. Cregan put a thingy here of Peter Pan on that quote. Shit, I wasn't supposed to read that part. But yeah, by avoiding the shadow, we are making it grow. The best thing we can do is to look at it and, in a way, analyze these avoided puzzle pieces of the complete self to find out where they come from and how they emerge. Doing so will help you control and harness these nether regions of the psyche. This dark part of the mind is half of what we are. Cregan put an image of Two-Face from Batman. That'd be rad AF. God, I did it again. And to become a whole entity, we must wear this as a garment, properly and gracefully. This video is meant to capture real, visceral shadow work, a phrase that has become trend and thus gravely misunderstood. This is the art of having a sword, but keeping it sheathed. This is how we use our pain as fuel. There is an important distinction to be made between what is peaceful innocence and what is just harmless. A person who is powerful should obviously choose to be peaceful and therefore has found a great virtue because they are capable of harm but just don't, even when they are tempted and tested. Instead, they use their own darkness as a tool of good use. There is a lot of energy waiting there. A person of weakness, however, might identify themselves as peaceful, but this is a self-destructive habit of so-called virtue signaling in my book, and well, this is my book. I don't like to use popular terms like that one, but it really works here. It is literally better to identify as weak and therefore earn respect in that fashion, truth, honor, etc., than to take on a false persona that will stretch out like a rubber band over time and break and smack your pupil off. You get it? Pupil off? Okay. Anyways, the denial of vulnerability is as much a part of the shadow as one who does not keep their sword yielded, thus becoming coarse and surly. To admit your weaknesses will lead you directly to your strong points, and that's a fact. For example, I have a lot of feminine energy up in this bitch. I enjoy arts and crafts, poetry, and playing with kiddos and kittens, as you've seen. So when I entered my field of work in construction, there was a temptation to act as tough as the other men before me, to become one of the guys. But I understood Jung and Campbell enough to realize that this would get me eaten alive. So I did exactly the opposite. Bringing intellect and creativity to the table led to several opportunities within that rugged world of construction, a world that turns out is in dire need of outside of the box thinking for problem solving. This trueness to oneself helps us identify how and why we judge others, oftentimes based on no criteria. We judge people and we don't know them. It's It's weird. The way you hold the idea of a person in your mind is only one version of that person that differs from everyone else's version of that person, making that notion of them unique to you. Therefore, is just an extension of you. Basically, what you find good about that person is what you like about yourself, and what you find repulsive in another is where you struggle within yourself. That is where the shadow work enters the picture. A practice that will lead you headfirst into anger, that is to say, healthy anger. It goes without saying that anger is just fuel for poor decisions. Bruce Lee once said, "A man is at his worst when he does not understand himself. He will work to accumulate external securities rather than do the inner work that will bring true security and rootedness." So cultivate and school yourself. If a wolf, for example, has what is considered to be too many cubs for the pack to care for, it will eat the weakest newborn cub. It is an act that seems abhorrent to human beings, and we assume that it is because we are more advanced. But we don't consider that this act leads to the betterment of the entire pack and can, in a strange way to us, be considered an act of love. Ants are an example of many creatures that do terrible things according to our standards of values, such as rape, war, and child labor. When these activities take place, we study them as nature and don't try to intervene or explain our values to them. We do, however, take a brutal stance against those of our own species that only differ from us even slightly. We judge them as if we are correct, and our point of view is centered on some kind of absolute righteousness. This just goes to show us that the nature of another person's wrongdoing reminds us of ourselves in a personal way, whether we see it consciously or not. Modern psychology has begun to understand that anger is not a prime emotion. It does not exist on its own merit, and there is no external forces that can cause you to feel anger. It seems as though anger is a cover emotion to mask fear. When we feel fear, there is a response to external forces that oftentimes manifests itself as hatred and jealousy, which also too seem to be masking fear. This is especially true in men, who at a very young age are taught to not feel fear or other emotions of vulnerability. This agenda is like tradition and utterly futile, as fear is indeed a prime emotion that we cannot avoid while in a human body. That cube is fitting to cast a shadow, but chill. Instead of teaching our children to avoid feelings of fear, we should teach them how to harness that primal drive and utilize it as a tool. We can better tune the energy of anger and jealousy when we realize that we are merely fractal byproducts of the unavoidable biological fear-based nervous system response. This has been called the animal nature in both alchemy and Zen. Once we recognize the emotion and trace the course of it back to fear, we are able to conduct ourselves in a behavior that will better suit our future selves. Responding to anger externally will never have an adequate solution to any problem. Just like Alan Watts said, no amount of anxiety has ever solved a problem. It's something like that. It is oftentimes like blowing on an open flame with the intention of extinguishing it, but only further spreading that fire to more vulnerable spaces. The recognition of fear, however, allows us the temperament to choose from the innate fight or flight response system. We get to pick our sacrifice, and that sacrifice should always be the self with a lowercase s. When this comes boiling up, we should pause at this point and make a conscious effort to not fan the flames, but instead to, metaphorically speaking, calmly retrieve water in order to put the fire out. Or, in many cases, simply walk away, allowing whatever is causing the flames to continue to burn itself down while we watch at a distance or even ignore. There are indeed cases and people that just can't be helped. But Have you ever noticed that we need villains to make ourselves right? Meanwhile, the villain believes themselves to be right and us to be wrong. So what we often fail to realize is that we walk out into the court of battle together and conduct this game of friction as one. So really, our opponents are actually comrades. In any game, tennis, or whatever, the other party is literally the key element of the game. They are why we play. Enemies are friends. So play the game without hating. A phrase that comes to mind is don't hate the player, hate the game, but let's level up here. And with training, realize that we can find peace and safety when we love the player and love the game. Our opponents are here to struggle with us. And if they didn't fight for what is right for them, then there would simply be no game and no points. Pun intended. To admit oneself as a Democrat or a Republican is to admit arrogance and ignorance. Instead, one should say to the other, you are absolutely necessary for me to exist as this persona. And right there is waiting for you safety in the acceptance of others. On that note, being on the spectrum between left and right, you know, the old facade, it is critical to add that you don't even have to play the game. Sit that one out completely. I mean, even if you are a so-called moderate or whatever mouth noise they call it now, you're still on that spectrum of participating in an obvious divide and conquer technique, even by playing the middle. The whole thing is nonsense. It doesn't exist. They made it up and we swallowed that dick and all of its. So I've come to notice that it's the most basic people who have trouble with the differences among human beings. And the most complex people seem to gravitate with joy toward those who are complete strangers to them, no matter how different aesthetically or psychologically. It is said, know thyself, 3 words. This is a worldwide and timeless axiom. What does it mean to know oneself? We certainly know who we are as far as our own persona, our daily obligations, and the surfacing of our thought patterns. But who is the guy in charge? Or at least, who is there to witness this process of personality unfold? Some might say that there is indeed no self to find, to know in the first place. We do, however, exist, and while existing, find so much discomfort in the process of living that we can't help but ask ourselves, who are we to feel this way or to even bear witness to something that can feel this way? What or who is this thing that feels? When we read the incredible words of C.G. Jung, we might find ourselves mystified or even confused by the psychological terms and cryptic spiritualized infliction of his writings. When we read lines like, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. There is a striking to the psyche that takes place as if we have realized a deep truth of 1,000 images. So much can be unpacked from this one single line. So many scenarios can be illuminated by this single idea. So what does it mean to make the unconscious conscious? That is to say, to bring the below up to the above. And how does it steer us in life without us realizing it? And once this process has happened, why do we blame external life, or as Grandpa called it, fate? A down-to-earth example of this psychological yet cryptic message might be a case of childhood traumas that led a person into micro behaviors that he or she does not realize based on their survival response to these traumatic events at an age when our behavioral mechanisms are still being developed and locked into place. We know now that with the science of neuroplasticity, no behavioral neural habits have to be permanent. And any thinking pattern can be changed with discipline and sacrifice. But first we have to know what those very patterns are before we can approach them safely and effectively. If a boy is, say, abandoned by his mother before the age of 8 years old, he will surely form a kind of survival mechanism within to cope with this gap in his life. This will not necessarily be painful at this age, as he has few other life events to compare and contrast it to. But when he enters into a relationship with a woman in his adulthood, he might accidentally start to fill that gap of a mother figure through his spouse. Depending on the circumstances, this could be a sort of clinging to, or even the opposite, being like a dominant resentment, both of which laying dormant, waiting like a serpent coiled. Again, there is a lot of energy there that can be harnessed, but without knowing his programming prior to his relationship, he will begin to express that serpent in small ways that lead to patterns of living. And this, of course, will cause friction within and without, oftentimes destroying the otherwise healthy relationship. So now we might have a case where prior trauma did not result in any physical health issues, but now causes a flow of cortisol and other chemical defense mechanisms that will alter and oftentimes decline the physical health of the person who doesn't even know that they had the trauma. Ignorance is not bliss. Let's get rid of that axiom. It's useless. We have to recognize these patterns before moving forward. Meditation, self-reflection, mind expanding, activities, all of which may help bring someone to the awareness of these programmed response systems, and then he can mitigate his behavior accordingly. Now, does this take the pain away? Oh, fuck no. In fact, you bet your left ass it's going to be worse during this realizing. But that is the point here, isn't it? When reaching into the part of the unconscious mind that contains that programming, there is a lot of darkness that is stumbled upon. When we run from this dragon, we become exhausted and continue on with the same patterns, worse now that they are fueled by fear. But if we study it and become calm, sitting with this painful realization, you know, what Uncle Joe called facing the dragon, we now consciously change the way we act according to what we have learned about that which we hide from ourselves. This is hide and seek within, but just dark as fuck. Now that the unconscious has become conscious and the below has been brought up to the above, the dark has been brought into the light, and you've heard all the axioms, we can begin to behave in ways that favor our preferred outcomes as long as they are in service to mankind. This is the Hermetic law of cause and effect, except this time we are manually causing the effect on purpose, with purpose, I should say. This betterment leads to a life that once accidentally might have been abysmal and thus blamed on fate. We make subtle right turns instead of one giant drastic one. I mean, unless you want to do it in one drastic move, that's cool too, but it is a bit riskier to the sanity you got there. So we can now take what others call fate into our own hands and program the surrounding reality instead of the opposite, it programming us. What we thought happened to us is really to be happening for us, as long as we have courage to open that box containing our darkest forms of programming and negative archetypes. To quote Anandamaya, the bliss-permeated mother mentioned on this channel a few times now, she said, when by the flood of your tears the inner and the outer have fused into one, you will find her whom you sought with such anguish, nearer than the nearest, the very breath of life, the very core of every heart. And the bliss-permeated mother is certainly a suitable nickname for this so-called saint. She's kind of hot too. Our old friendo, Manly P. Hall, popping with his 33rd degree, said, they wander in darkness seeking the light, failing to realize that the light is in the heart of the darkness. And you know what? To go a bit outside of the realm of the esoteric, I would like to quote John Witherspoon from the movie Friday, where he said, you're going to fight. You're going to fight and you're going to lose, but you'll live. You'll live to fight another day. We can find, gems within the comedies. So how does the concept of the unification of opposites apply here? Let's get Hermetic for a moment, or even in Zen, what is called the middle path. This idea can be said in such technical and cryptic fluff, but the idea is simple if we use a metaphor. Imagine a rubber band between your hands connected to a center point, say a slingshot. Oh, we are best to live our lives like this. If you can see my left hand, or I'm gonna get over here. So we'll consider the left to be discomfort and pain, and the right to be pleasure and satisfaction. Now, if we live our lives like this, that rubber band is wearing out fast as fuck. And when it finally snaps, it's going to propel drastically into the left side. In the same way that a healthy dark night of the soul pulls the left side, and if done with a healthy acceptance, it won't break, but instead propels you into the right side of our analogy here. So keeping the tension of the poles, as Carl described it, like the cross, creates a healthy balance that allows that pendulum to sway and center, ebb and flow, another Hermetic principle known as rhythm. So a funny example would be that priest a while back who spent years preaching about the sins of homosexuality, and then he was caught red-handed with an underage male prostitute. Whether he knew it or not, he subconsciously put himself in that position to be caught. He lived his life pulling this rubber band as hard as he could to the right. And then, of course, blam, it slung him headfirst into the left side over here. Now, so what would have happened if he had unified those opposites and simultaneously admitting his weaknesses openly, like we said at the top of this video? He might have preached about his own struggle with homosexuality. He, of course, for some reason feeling like it is immoral, denied that part of his animal nature, and therefore the subconscious was not brought up to the conscious, and it controlled his destiny, and he called it fate, considering that he got caught. And I mean, he lost everything. And I mean everything. But had he openly admitted that he was struggling with this part of himself, that rubber band would flux gracefully. And despite having haters along the way, he would have not found himself in the despair that he is in now. And might even still be preaching as a unique and a one-of-a-kind honest preacher. And on that note, there is no secret to all of you that I struggle with drugs and alcohol. Yet I get up here and I sling words about the importance of sobriety, words that I believe to be true. If I denied the addict within me and thus acted like that preacher against substance abuse, one day I would surely relapse and be seen as a fraud, thus losing all of this. My personal shadow haunts me on a daily basis. There is no way to ignore it, so I don't. And now, like the beginning of this video promised, I would like to show you firsthand the benefits of admitting your weaknesses and using them as a tool for good. The kindness that you all have shown me in this journey has changed my life. So that being said, I have never asked people to comment for the sake of boosting the algorithm. But you know what? I'll say this. If you have something that you struggle with internally, and only if you're comfortable, please feel free to share it with this loving community, and maybe even be surprised as to how many people smash the love button for you and comment that they are also the same. Because I promise you this, we are exactly that, the same.